The cold steel of the alien chamber never changed its temperature. It was always the same, never warm, never comforting, only cruel and lifeless. Surrounding her like a coffin made for the living, she had lost count of the hours and days, but her body remembered every second of the pain, every minute of the isolation, and every moment of the fear. Lena sat in the middle of the room, her wrists bound above her head by a strange glowing thread that pulsed softly, like it was alive, as if it enjoyed her suffering as much as the creatures watching her. The Karnath were tall, thin creatures with eyes that didn't blink and voices that rattled like grinding stones. They didn't speak in words, but in vibrations that echoed inside her skull. They had asked her questions over and over about Earth's defense systems, about her mission, and about human strategy. But no matter what they did, she gave them nothing. Sometimes they used electric pulses, sometimes chemicals that made her mind drift into darkness, then snap her back again just before she could rest. It was their favorite method, breaking her slowly, but never completely. There was no hope in the chamber, only pain, only memories, and the quiet thought that maybe this would be her. And she remembered home vaguely, the sound of waves crashing on rocks, the scent of coffee in the morning, the feeling of wind brushing against her face. Now all of that seemed like a dream fading away. With every scream that echoed against the metal walls, her voice had grown hoarse, her body weakened, but inside a small flame refused to die. It was quiet, but it was there like a whisper, reminding her to hold on just a little longer. In another part of the galaxy, far from the torture chamber, Lone Human was flying a patched-together cargo ship across the black stretch of space. Ray was not a soldier, not a hero, not even the type others would trust with serious responsibility, but what he lacked in discipline, he made up for in stubbornness. He had been running supplies between border colonies when he caught a strange signal buried beneath static and distortion. It was weak, almost dead, but there was something in the pattern, something familiar that made him pause. He ran the signal through filters, rechecked coordinates, and then stared at the screen in disbelief. It was a distress signal, a human one from deep inside Karnath. Space. No one was supposed to be out there. No human should even be close to that region. The official response would be to report the signal and move on, let the brass handle it, let the paperwork stack up. But Ray was not built like that. He looked at the map, at the blinking point of the signal, and then at the message that had nearly vanished into space silence, and with a sigh that carried more anger than fear, he turned the ship around against all orders, against all sense. Back in the alien facility, Lena coughed weakly, her throat dry, her skin bruised, her mind clouded, but still she did not break. The Karnath watched her with their emotionless eyes, but even they began to sense something strange about her. They didn't understand why she had not screamed for mercy, why she did not beg for death, like so many others had before her. One of them leaned in closer, almost curious, and in that moment, through cracked lips and bleeding breath, Lena managed to whisper a few broken words, not to the aliens, not to herself, but to the void above. He's coming. She did not know how or when or even who, but deep inside she believed it. Someone somewhere was reckless enough to try, someone who didn't wait for orders, someone who didn't care about protocol, someone who still remembered what it meant to fight for one of their own, even in the darkest corner of the galaxy, where no help was expected, where no light remained. Karnath laughed in their cruel way, but they did not see the spark in her eyes returning. Not hope, not yet, but something close and far away. The engines of an old ship flared to life as it crossed into forbidden space, carrying a reckless human who had just made the most dangerous decision of his life. And he was not turning back. Ray sat alone in the cockpit as stars blurred past the window, not because he was fast, but because he was heading where no one wanted to go. His ship, old and dented, carried the scars of old battles and lazy repairs. It creaked with every movement, and the warning lights on the control panel flickered like they had given up trying to scare him a long time ago. But Ray was not bothered by broken systems or danger. He was more concerned with the voice in his head, the one that kept asking why he was doing this. Had no orders, no backup, no promise of reward or medals. This wasn't his mission, and the person sending that signal was likely already gone or past saving, but still something inside him refused to turn back. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was pride, or maybe it was just the stubborn human belief that no one gets left behind. Whatever it was, it pushed him forward as the Karnath region grew closer and the silence of space turned heavier around him. Back at Earth, command screens were alive with data streams, and military chatter officers argued around a glowing table where a blinking red dot marked Ray's ship. One of them shook his head, saying the pilot was unstable, unpredictable, a risk to the treaty that kept the Karnath from full-scale war. Another said he wouldn't make it past their perimeter defenses. No human ship had ever returned from deep inside their borders. Someone suggested disabling his ship remotely, but the signal was scrambled, the system too old to connect, and Ray had made sure of that before he left in the cell. Lena had stopped reacting to the pain, her mind floating somewhere between sleep and memory. She saw faces from her past, her mother smiling, her father waving from the port station, her younger brother laughing on a dusty street. But then the images shifted and she saw the Karnath again, standing tall with their dead eyes watching her, body broken. Her spirit cracked but still alive. She didn't scream anymore, even though the pain had not stopped. She had learned to carry it, hold it inside. Like armor, her silence was her weapon, and the Karnath were starting to feel it. One of the alien guards watched her longer than the others, its head tilting slightly, as if studying a puzzle. It didn't understand Lena's resistance was not physical anymore. It was something deeper, something alien to the Karnath themselves. They understood fear, they understood submission, but they didn't understand this quiet strength, this refusal to surrender without a word. In space, Ray adjusted his course manually. The navigation system had stopped responding, and he had to rely on old maps burned into his memory. The Karnath perimeter loomed ahead, an invisible wall of scanners and defense satellites, waiting for any unauthorized presence. He smiled to himself, remembering the stories told in bars and forgotten stations about the death zone, the region where ships vanished without a trace. But Ray was not interested in stories. He was interested in the signal that had started it all, still weak, but still pulsing through his system like a whisper from the dark. He powered down most of the systems, dimmed the lights, and switched to silent drift, using the darkness to cover his approach. If they caught him now, it was over, but he knew how to play this game. He had smuggled supplies through blockades, outrun pirates in asteroid fields, and once escaped a security lockdown by hiding under a shipment of sewage tanks. This was different, but the rules were the same: stay low, stay quiet, and always move forward. The Karnath didn't notice him at first. Their sensors focused on larger threats: military ships, organized fleets, official missions. Ray was none of those, just a blip lost in the cold space between stars. By the time they noticed him, it would be too late. He smiled again, not out of confidence, but because he enjoyed being underestimated. Inside the facility, Lena opened her eyes for a moment, her body shivering from cold and pain, but her heart beat a little faster, like it sensed something. Like her instincts knew a change was coming. The Karnath continued their routines, scanning her brain with strange beams, adjusting the devices around her, poking and measuring. But she was somewhere else now. She was thinking about freedom. Not because she believed it would come, but because she needed to remember how it felt. Ray approached the outer shell of the alien zone, his ship now completely dark, floating like space debris, but his eyes were sharp, scanning for patterns, scanning for a way in. He spotted a maintenance grid buried beneath defense lines, something old and likely forgotten, a gap too small for big ships, too risky for drones, but just enough for him. He took a deep breath and pushed forward. Lena closed her eyes again and whispered, without knowing why or how or to whom she was speaking. She said the same two words she had spoken before, but this time with more certainty. S coming, and out there in the black sky filled with danger and death, a reckless human moved closer, ready to break every rule, ready to defy every warning, because someone was still alive, someone was still waiting, and he was not going to let her die alone. The Karnath facility floated like a dark wound against the fabric of space, quiet, cold, and unshaken. by the small ship that now drifted dangerously close to its hidden shell. The outer structure was built for war and intimidation, sharp angles and thick plating designed to repel fleets and frighten enemies, but it wasn't built to notice a single stubborn soul slipping in beneath. Its massive blind spot ray had found the maintenance grid, tucked behind a series of old antennae corroded with time, ignored by security and forgotten by designers because no one sane would ever come this way. But sanity was never Ray's strong point inside. His ship, the lights were off, and the systems ran quiet, only the navigation core flickered with dull light guiding his manual flight path. He had stripped the ship of any signal that could alert the Cardiff scanners. He even shut down life support, relying on a tight suit and shallow breathing to carry him through the approach now as the ship floated inches from the steel wall of the enemy station. Ray moved to the airlock and suited up his hands, shaking slightly from adrenaline. Or maybe cold, but his mind was clear. He opened the hatch, climbed out, and used magnetic grips to pull himself along. The structure slow, careful, precise, his eyes scanning every surface for traps or triggers. He found the panel he had guessed would be there, a small locked plate rusted at the edges but still functional with fingers practiced from years of breaking into things. He peeled the cover and rewired the access line, sending a low-voltage signal through the connection and praying the door still worked after all this time. With a soft click, the hatch opened. Not a blast, not an alarm, just a quiet welcome to a human who should not be there. Ray slipped inside, moved down a narrow shaft filled with dust and stale air. The lights inside the tunnel flickered as he passed, like the place itself was unsure how to respond to his presence. He didn't stop to rest, didn't waste time. His path was mapped in his mind, every turn memorized from stolen plans, every vent and ladder counted from forgotten documents. This was not luck, this was obsession. The deeper he moved, the clearer the sounds became, alien hums, low pulses, metallic echoes from machines that breathed and lived in ways he didn't understand. He passed rooms filled with strange equipment, saw glimpses of creatures in containment chambers, saw what the Carnith did to other species who dared resist, but he didn't stop. His hands clenched tighter around the small blaster at his hip, and his heart beat louder, not from fear but fury. Somewhere beyond those walls, Lena was still alive. He believed it, not because he had proof, but because he refused to think otherwise. Lena had faded in and out of awareness more times than she could count, but now something in the air felt different. Not the pain that came like a clockwork rhythm, not the cold that wrapped her bones, something else. She lifted her head weakly, her vision blurred, but she sensed motion outside her cell. Someone moving, not with the heavy steps of Carnith soldiers, but with lighter, quicker steps, like someone trying not to be heard. Ray stopped at a locked doorway, checked the control panel, and began working quickly. The encryption was Carnith, but the core system was ancient, simple enough for someone like him to bypass with the right timing. He hacked the lock and waited for the soft shift of gears and the hiss of pressurized air. When the door slid open, he stepped into the chamber, and his eyes met the sight that would never leave his memory. Lena sat against the far wall, slumped, bloodied, thin, barely able to lift her head, her face swollen, her skin covered with bruises and cuts. Yet when she saw him, something flashed in her eyes. Not recognition, not understanding, but something almost like relief. Ray rushed forward, lifted her gently, removed the binds that held her, and whispered words she could barely hear, telling her she was safe now that he was here, that they were getting out. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Her body too weak to respond. Still, her hand reached for his shoulder, like she needed to make sure he was real. The moment shattered as alarms burst into life. Red lights flared along the corridor behind them, and the voice of the facility system screeched across the hallways in a language Ray couldn't understand, but he understood the meaning. They had been found in time, had run out. He lifted Lena into his arms, turned and ran back the way he came. But now every shadow held danger. Doors slammed shut behind him. Security bots emerged from walls. Guards, armed with alien weapons, took position ahead. But Ray didn't stop. He fired back with short, controlled blasts, each shot buying seconds, each second dragging them closer to the exit. Lena clung to his chest, her eyes half closed, her mind trying to process what was happening, but her heart beating stronger with each breath. She was leaving the chamber of pain and death, and the one carrying her was not part of any army or mission. He was alone, reckless, uninvited, and unstoppable. As Ray reached the maintenance shaft, he pulled out a small device clipped to his belt, a bomb not made for destruction, but for chaos. He slapped it to the wall, set the timer, and climbed with Lena in his arms as the explosion shook the lower levels of the station. Power flickered, systems glitched, doors failed to open, and screams echoed through the metal halls behind them. Ray reached the hatch, threw it open, and dragged them both into the ship, closing the lock just as the station began sealing itself into defense mode. He dropped into the pilot's seat, hit every switch he needed, and powered up the engines. The ship roared with life, angry, groaning, unstable but alive, just like the man flying it. Didn't wait for permission, didn't check coordinates. He flew hard away from the station, just as the Carnith fighters launched from the upper deck, swarming the space like hornets. But Ray had one thing they didn't: wild, stubborn, reckless speed. And behind him, in the shadows of the broken chamber, the walls still echoed with the whisper of a girl who had survived long enough to be found by someone the Carnith never expected. Engines screamed beneath the hull of the ship as it bolted through the black stretch of space, moving not like a military cruiser, not like a sleek fighter, but like a wild beast, wounded, furious, and desperate to survive. Ray kept one hand on the controls and the other gripping the emergency stabilizer, his eyes locked on the screen, showing half a dozen Carnith fighters closing in from all directions. The ship shook with every movement. The warning lights flashed with angry color, but Ray pushed harder, forcing the engines past their limits. Lena lay strapped in the co-pilot seat, barely conscious, her face pale, her body limp, yet her fingers twitched slightly with every jolt, every tremor, like her spirit refused to sleep completely. Her eyes blinked open for moments, only to close again. But in those brief flashes, she saw the man beside her, focused, alive, unafraid. The Carnith fighters moved fast, faster than any human ship should ever try to challenge. But Ray's vessel didn't follow clean flight paths, didn't behave with precision. It weaved and spun and dropped into wild spirals like it had no plan, and that was exactly how Ray wanted it to be. They had trained to predict logic, to read patterns, to respond to control. But Ray gave them nothing to follow, only madness wrapped in steel and fire. Rear cameras showed the facility behind them, the station still smoking from the earlier blast. Its outer panels cracked, its lights flickering as systems failed section by section. The chaos Ray had triggered inside the structure was spreading as power cores overloaded and backup grids fought against corrupted circuits. The base was not built to contain such disorder, and now it was falling apart from the inside. One of the alien commanders barked orders in a voice filled with frustration as their prize slipped through their grasp. The humans were not supposed to enter this deep, not without fleets, not without warning, and certainly not alone. Yet here was one man with a broken ship tearing through their defenses, carrying away a prisoner they had tried to break for days without success. Ray knew they were close to the outer gravity edge, the point where the pull of the nearby collapsed star bent time and direction. The region was unstable, a navigational nightmare, but it was the only way he saw out. The Carnith wouldn't risk it. Their ships were too valuable, too precise. They feared losing control inside that madness, but Ray didn't fear losing control. He lived inside Ive, pulled hard on the controls, and dove the ship downward into the shifting field where light twisted and the stars looked like rivers, bending in slow motion. Alarms screamed louder. His seat rattled with force. The hull groaned as invisible waves slammed against it, but still the engines roared, and still Ray held on. Behind them, two of the Carnith fighters attempted to follow their sleek design, not made for chaos but speed and agility. They moved like blades, sharp and accurate, but inside the distorted field, accuracy meant nothing. One was pulled into a spin, colliding with floating debris and vanishing into a silent flame. The other struggled to regain control, then turned back, retreating to safety rather than be swallowed by the dark ray. laughed without joy, just the raw sound of someone defying everything around him with only sheer nerve. The ship dipped lower, sparks flying across the control board. Lena stirred again, her voice barely above a whisper, as she asked if they were falling. Ray told her no. He told her they were flying, and nothing was going to stop them. Now the gravity wave tried to drag them down, but Ray knew how to ride its edge, how to use the pressure, not as a trap, but as a slingshot. He calculated nothing relied on instinct, memory, madness. He tilted the wings, fired the boosters, and released the stabilizers all at once, sending the ship spinning forward at a speed that bent the radar and threw off the pursuing sensors. For a moment everything became quiet. The stars straightened, the engines cooled, the warnings ceased, only the hum of deep space remained, and then the ship broke free, sliding out of the distorted zone like a bullet leaving a spiral tunnel. Ray collapsed back in his seat, breathing heavy, his hands numb, but still gripping the controls. Lena opened her eyes for a few seconds longer. This time she saw stars that did not twist, she saw light that did not burn, and she saw the back of the man who had pulled her out from the nightmare, without any order, without any promise, without fear. Carnith Command issued alerts across the sector, but it was already too late. Ray had vanished off their systems, using their own blind spots to disappear into the outer rim, where no one could track him. Their facility damaged their fighters, defeated their pride, shaken by one reckless human who had no right to succeed but had done so anyway. Inside the ship, the silence was not empty. It was full of breath, heartbeat, engine purr, and the slow return of something that had been stolen, but not destroyed. A pale blue moon floated quietly near the edge of the neutral zone, surrounded by layers of dust and silence, untouched by patrols, ignored by trade routes, forgotten by war maps. It was the kind of place meant for those who didn't want to be found, and that was exactly why Ray had chosen it. He guided the ship down through the thin atmosphere, the engines humming low, the sky reflecting off the scratched glass of the cockpit. His eyes tired but alert, his hands steady despite everything they had just survived. Lena rested in a recovery pod beside the control deck, her skin pale, her breath shallow, her body still weak but her mind no longer trapped in darkness. She had come back from the edge, held by the strength of a stranger's madness, pulled from the jaws of cruelty by someone who never should have been there in the first place. The pod systems kept her stable, monitored her vitals, fed her small amounts of liquid and warmth. While she slept, her memories flickered behind closed eyes, flashes of pain broken by moments of escape, and somewhere in those memories, the face of a man who had said nothing heroic, who had made no promises but had still come for her. Ray powered down the engines and stepped out of the ship. The wind on the moon was soft and thin, barely enough to move dust, but it felt real, it felt clean. He looked around the empty landscape and then turned back to the ramp where the door lowered, slowly revealing the woman he had risked everything to save, standing on her own feet, supported by a cane and the strength she had found again. She walked slowly, her legs unsure, her balance shifting with each step, but she did not fall. Her eyes met his, without fear, without confusion, only the quiet expression of someone who had been broken and was now beginning to rebuild herself, not because of safety, not because of comfort, but because someone had reminded her that she still mattered. Ray nodded toward her, not needing words, because sometimes silence carried more than sound. Lena stood beside him, looked up at the stars, and took a deep breath, her lungs struggling to fill but refusing to quit. Back on Earth Command, the story spread not through official channels, not in briefings or reports, but in hushed conversations and quiet rumors. One man had entered Carnith space, one man had broken into their strongest facility, one man had rescued a prisoner and brought her back alive. No fleet, no squad, just one pilot in a ship held together with wire and grit. Carnith denied the failure. At first claimed the human had not escaped, claimed the prisoner was still within their grasp. But evidence leaked piece by piece, recordings, intercepted data fragments, pulled from damaged satellites, pieces of truth that painted a picture no one could ignore. Across colonies and outposts, the tale grew, whispered in docking bays, passed in bars, retold in classrooms. One human had done what no army dared to try. He had defied protocol, risked death, and walked away from an empire's grip with nothing but determination and a target. Lena recovered slowly, her body healing her mind. Adjusting, she spoke rarely, and only to those she trusted. She never told the full story, never described the pain or the silence or the walls that had tried to crush her. Instead, she talked about the stars and how they looked different, now not brighter, not darker, just clearer, as if the universe had opened a new path she had never noticed before. Ray didn't stay long. He was not made for stillness, not made for metals or attention. He checked her vitals one last time, checked the ship's fuel, and left without a sound, only a scribbled note left behind with a half-smile drawn in the corner and one sentence written in messy script saying, "Next time someone else should do the rescuing." The moon remained quiet, the stars kept spinning, and the universe moved forward unchanged on the surface, but deep within its endless dark, a story had been written into the bones of those who remembered, not just about torture or survival, not just about cruelty or escape, but about the kind of reckless, impossible courage only humans seem to carry. And somewhere out there, far beyond known space, a lone ship moved like a shadow chasing the horizon, while behind it followed the echo of a name not official, not honored, but remembered, because sometimes all it takes to shake an empire is one human who refuses to stop. This story ends here, complete, closed, no open doors, no missing pieces, just the memory of pain turned into strength, and the truth that even in the deepest night, hope can still wear the face of the unexpected. The end.